And we're back with another episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series where we continue our 2018 BioCup coverage. As I said, this is, I guess you could call it, part 2 of our continuation of covering the preliminary rounds for the BioCup 2018. This episode, we're going to be covering the top 3 mocks of the preliminaries. Now, these guys scored the 3 highest scores. We're just going to take a little bit of time to have a look at all 3 of them and just have a little bit of a chat about what we liked and why these guys did so well. Because heck, if you've made it into the next round, or you didn't make it in the next round, but you want to improve, you want to come back next year, guns are blazing, and you want to take out the competition, and you are going to spend the rest of the year preparing to win, well then it's definitely a great idea to study up and take a little bit of an objective look at why these mocks are so awesome. So, let's do that now, shall we? So, let us begin with the mock that came 3rd place, and it scored a triumphant, drumroll please, there was like a digital drum roll with no bass at all, just Ben's mouth. It scored 159 points out of a possible 180. This mock is by King Mocchi and is called Incendious Rex. Now, the element that this mock was covering was iron and fire. So that was something the judges always stressed, was they wanted to see stuff which was a unique take on the theme of elements. You know, we saw some people build Kendrick Lamar, we saw some people build a scientist discovering a brand new element, stuff like that. And of course some of these other winners will take the theme and place it and use it in very interesting, cool ways. But something that I like about this mock is it's actually just a plain and simple animal that has control over a couple elements. Sometimes simple is best. Sometimes you don't need to, spend ages thinking outside the box, overcomplicate it, be a creative genius who knows everything. Sometimes you can just take the easier option, but do some really cool stuff with it and it become extraordinary. I think that's really cool. Because I guess to a degree, it's like, why we liked all the old Bionicle sets. It's just a tower of fire, a tower of water, something like that. So it's just cool to see a very well-designed dinosaur that has control over iron and fire. So that's nice. It's nice to see that you don't necessarily need to think outside the box. Of course, it helps, but it's nice that, you don't always have to. Besides the point, let's talk and go a little bit more in depth on what's so awesome about this mock. So there's a very, very clever jaw design on this mock. It uses some of these, I believe they came in the Chima CCBS sets, uses some of these sort of axe sword pieces here as the bottom of the jaw and the mouth and everything like that. It's just a surprisingly effective, very nice way of using that part to create that jaw effect, because ironically the back of that kind of axe piece there mirrors a jaw very nicely. And then coupling that with one of those sort of tube pieces with all those claws and teeth and things coming down there, it makes a very beautifully designed overall mouth. It's very effective and it works very well. So very cool to see a brilliant part use there to make up the head. And speaking of the head, it's very nicely shaped too. There's not really any gaps. The fact that it's iron as an element, it looks very mechanical, it looks very, very Bionicle-y, which I think is really cool. And that's something that I think is very much the case with this mock. It very effectively combines the overall sort of Bionicle aesthetic. You see stuff like on the legs with these pipes and the repeated parts throughout the tail, and even some of these classic Bionicle pieces on here, and just the overall robotic look that's a little bit more prominent in the top of the head there. And then you combine it with some more organic stuff, like the fire bits around the chest and things like that, and it just looks very Bionicle-y, and that's just cool, especially because this is our Bionicle contest, essentially. So, in my opinion, they've somehow really managed to capture what, to me, is very quintessentially a Bionicle aesthetic. And it's really, really cool. So I briefly mentioned some of the old classic Bionicle pieces here. If we take a look at these feet here, it's a very simple design, just simply using these old Mutter pieces in a very clever way. I sort of look at these pieces and I don't know, personally they're a little bit harder to use for me, but they work very, very well as the sort of toes of the feet here. And it's just really effective. It's just a nice way of using those parts. It, in my opinion, flows very well with the rest of the mock and looks great. So awesome to see that. Awesome to see how this mock has used those, what I would define as a sort of harder to use piece in a very creative and clever way. And it's also a great way to not actually use too many pieces, but effectively make a very nice section of the mock. And that's really cool in itself. One thing I also really like, and I think this kind of matches with that Bionicle aesthetic which I was talking about, is the rib cage on this mock. Using some of these curved Technic lift arm pieces. I don't know what, I think that's what you call them. I don't know. I could check Bricklink, but someone will correct me in the comments. But using those and then combining it with these other claw pieces in trans orange there really looks beautiful. It's very organic, but it's also very robotic, and it looks very much like fire. Just the way that the trans orange is kind of peeking out through the black there, it kind of looks like flames emanating out of something. It's just really, really cool. It almost looks a bit like an engine flaring to life, but it also looks very organic and like a rib cage. So again, a beautiful way of combining things and playing around with stuff to really match this look of iron and fire and like mechanical and living and elements and all these other words that sound like what I'm trying to communicate to you, but it just looks nice. It's a very beautiful hybrid of the two and a great way of sort of exploring the element. So yeah, a lot to love about this mock, and it's interesting how effectively it communicates the aesthetic that it's going for, and how it very expertedly, that's not a word, how very masterfully it plays around with the element itself, conveying it in a beautiful way that combines the two and kind of makes it into this really clever hybrid. It's very, very effective. But surprisingly quite simple too, you know, he's just repeated a bunch of parts, used some old classic Bionicle pieces, even like those Borok mask or Krana holder pieces there, as sort of like a back spine thing. It looks really cool. Just playing around with the various pieces in a manner and in a fashion that it just works. I don't know. I don't think he's necessarily done anything different. It's just he's just kind of played around with the parts, shaped them nicely, and got a very nice end result. So nicely done. Very nice to see someone just playing and enjoying what they're doing. So very cool. Very cool. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Sergei Rachmaninoff and is called Euclid, Author of Elements. Now we're going into the territory of really playing around and coming up with some creative, clever ways of conveying the theme of elements. So I will read to you the description that Mr. Sergei has said here. He said, after a day or two of muddling through various unsatisfying elements from alchemy, technology, and science, I suddenly recalled the Greek mathematician and his landmark geometry textbook entitled Elements. I knew I would depict him, and in a Bionicle twist, he now wields geometry powers in addition to his trademark compass and straight edge. I think that's really clever, and that's really cool. It's a bit like the Kendrick Lamar mock that I keep referring to. It's finding something that's actually called Elements, like this guy's book, and then finding a very clever, unique way of incorporating that onto a mock. So cool that he's managed to, very successfully I might add, build a Bionicle recreation of this old mathematician, and then found a very cool way of incorporating his book and his studies into him and making that very Bionicle as a whole. And so he's done that in some very creative and clever ways. Let's talk a bit about them. So there's this cute little book design here that he's got, which is really, really simple, but really, really effective. Just using some system parts there to create the book. And then we use a little bit more system combined with some CCBS trans blue bone pieces. And he's got this cool sort of elemental geometry power thing that he's wielding up there. And I think that's really cool. It's just the presentation of this mock, using those little additions and accessories and things like that to really kind of bring this mock to life and showcase it in a really nice way. And that's something that I think is extremely important, is never to forget that the presentation of a mock is just as important as the build itself. Whether that's down to how you photograph it, putting it in some cool poses, or even just including some nice accessories and fun little additions like that really help bring it to life more. I think that's always something that's important to remember, and I think this is a mock that does that very nicely and very effectively. I think it's really cool. Something else that's really cool is he's used this new Praetorian Guard cape piece here, but he's done something a little bit more unique and fun with it. He's grabbed some Technic lift arms in red and an axle there, and almost created like an actual clip to sort of clip the cape back a bit there. You can kind of see these folded the cape slightly and then clipped it together. I think that's very, very clever. It's a really nice way of kind of making the cape behave in the way you want it to behave, because, man, sometimes capes can be a little bit frustrating. So I think that's a very simple, creative solution to fix that problem. So I want to talk a little bit about the awesome beard design that this mock has. Using the Viscerac claw pieces there, sort of for the kind of outside of the beard, it's amazing the texture on that piece, how effectively it works at looking like the texture of a beard or hair. It's just awesome. And then it's also really cool how kind of coupling that with just a lot of system parts and claw pieces and things like that, it actually still flows very nicely together. It's interesting. It's just really cool. It's also really cool too. Obviously, pretty much all of this head is using a lot of system pieces, but, you know, using these claws and the smaller claws there for eyebrows, it's just cool to kind of create that mustache and the eyebrows and things like that, kind of focusing in on a little bit more detail. So awesome to see him playing around with system and some really fun ways to create a very iconic and fun looking face design there. So this mock as a whole is very well-rounded. There's not a lot of gaps throughout it. It's very whole, for lack of a better word. You know, you take a look at the arms and the legs and everything. There's no gaps. Everything just flows very nicely. It's just well shaped and well made, and that's awesome. It's definitely a credit to the mock because it just looks so much better. It's almost a case that all the pieces look like they were just meant to be attached together, and that's always sort of just more visually pleasing to look at. So that's really cool. Something else that's really, really cool is the sandals. Obviously, this guy is a bit of an old mathematician there, so he's wearing the height of fashion sandals. And a brilliant idea to use these slicer feet here in tan. Of course, in case you hadn't noticed, the color blocking here, very nicely done, using the tan as parts where his flesh is, and then of course the key orange and red as his cloth clothing, but using the slicer head here as his feet, and then building this sort of system apparatus at the bottom there to form the base of the sandal, and then simply attaching a droid arm there to act as the sort of little bit of the bridge where your toe slips into if he's wearing an actual sandal. I just think that's so clever. It's just a slight little addition there, but it's very effective and communicates very, very obviously that it's a sandal. It's just a genius design. I absolutely love that. So a lot of really nice stuff going on with this mock, some brilliant shaping, some great ways of playing with textures, and a very unique take on the theme. Very, very cool. Let's move on to the mock that won the preliminaries in the Bio Cup. This mock scored a whole 173. I stumbled over my words. I'm the worst announcer man ever. Okay, all right, Jim. I'm gonna get this right this time. All right. So this mock scored a possible 173 points out of 180 points. This mock is by Rock Monster 2000. It is called Elmer Dark Sprite. Very, very cool. Very, very cool mock. Again, we see a very nicely designed overall whole mock. It doesn't have any gaps. The pieces just look like they flow beautifully together. Some great shaping. Awesome stuff. It's cool as well to see how nicely the sort of smooth textures on this mock actually flow into some of the kind of rougher textures on this mock. Now, when I say rough textures, it's a little bit subjective there, but we look at the lower legs and the lower arms here, and he's used a lot of minifigure hands here, almost to kind of create this hair effect that you might see on a bug, because this is essentially a big bug guy. And it's beautiful because, I don't know, conceptually in my head I would say maybe that texture won't really flow well with the rest of the sort of smoother textures on this mock, but it actually does. And it just logically makes sense because, like I said, it's a bug guy, that he would have some hairier parts on him because, you know, a lot of bugs tend to have that. And it's just cool. It's a nice little addition. Always nice to play around with minifigure hands there, because they're actually a surprisingly helpful small piece that you're able to achieve some nice things with here, as we can clearly see. But let's talk about one of my favorite parts of this mock, which is towards the top, kind of the, I guess you could say, hair design. It's probably not, but spawning out of the head are all these beautiful lavender leaf pieces, and they kind of are also on the back and the shoulders to a degree. And something I love about this is the awesome contrast between the sort of duller color scheme of brown, black, and dark tan, and little bits of white and stuff like that there, and then suddenly it has this beautiful burst of lavender at the top, and that's just an excellent, beautiful color scheme. And I think that's always something to remember, is a beautiful color scheme is always something that's just more visually pleasing and beautiful on a mock. especially when you're playing around with more recent colors. Obviously, lavender is a little bit older nowadays, but it's still a color you don't see that often on mocks, whether it's system or Bionicle, unless of course it's a Friends mock, because it's kind of a bit of a staple color for Friends. But it's just awesome to see colors like that, some of the Friends colors, some of the newer colors that have come out, things like that, being used on a mock, because I don't know, there's just something about it. It just looks fresh, it just looks nice, it just looks awesome. And I think as well, there's something about the fact that they are leaf pieces that helps. I think it just adds a very interesting aesthetic to the mock, because like I said, it's this kind of bug guy, so the fact that he has leaves coming out of him is just a little bit more interesting. It's a bit out there, it's a bit unique, and unique is always something that's cool, seeing that on a mock. So I really like that he's, one, used such a beautiful color to create such a beautiful overall color scheme, as well as using a more unique part for that beautiful accent color on this mock. So I think that's really, really cool, and is definitely the piece de resistance on this mock. Absolutely love it. Another thing I absolutely love is this overall head design here. Again, it uses some newer pieces here, these funky new curvy claw pieces coming out of the top. That's another thing that's always nice, is just seeing new pieces being used on a mock. Again, that's visually pleasing to me. I always love seeing that, because it's like, oh, hey, you use that cool new piece. Awesome. Nice to see. It's very fresh. It's nice. It's new. It's cool. So that's cool. I like that. But yeah, it uses this awesome sort of Joxon-inspired mouth design here. It uses these Exoforce hands and attaches some clips on them to create a beautiful, very effective mouth design. Absolutely love that. So yeah, a lot to love about this, and one thing that I think is very, very cleverly done is the beautiful transition between sort of construction, CCBS, Bionicle parts, and system. We see the dishes here on the torso. They flow so beautifully into that CCBS sort of chest piece there. There's no gaps there. It almost looks like a perfect transition. It's awesome. And speaking of perfect transition, with the continuation of the waist down into the legs, just how almost all of that leg there is system, but it transitions very beautifully up into very heavily Bionicle CCBS pieces. And I don't know, there's just something about those textures and the color scheme and everything that he's kind of playing around with there. It's just an effective transition. It looks nice. Those system pieces there aren't jarring in any way. It's just a beautiful transition. So it's really, really cool. So yeah, a lot to love about this mock, a lot to love about all three of these mocks, and they were the lucky 3 winners of the BioCup 2018. Now you may be asking, Ben, what was your favorite of the BioCup 2018? And I said, well, at least of the preliminary rounds. This is a good question, Jimmy. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to do an episode of my 3 favorites. I've really been enjoying all the mocks that have been coming out of it, to be perfectly honest with you. I know that's like the cop-out answer, where it's like, hey Stan Lee, what's your favorite superhero? And it's like, I love all the superheroes I've made. It's like, oh, come on, man, like, give me a straight answer. But, no, I apologize. That is my answer. But, yeah, I'll probably do an episode on that. I'll probably do it when the BioCup finishes and just be like, here's my favorite from each round. Meh. Yeah, that'd be fun. Anyway, besides the point, I'm going off track here. Awesome to see the 3 winners of the preliminaries. Great to see some fantastic, well-designed mocks coming out of it that aren't even just these 3 mocks. So many brilliant entries into the BioCup. Looking forward to seeing more. So, that's about it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you were inspired. If you're heading on into round 2 oh man, I'm gonna keep doing this. I can't wait until it's round 2, because then I'm gonna be calling it round 3 and round 7 and all that. Anyway, besides the point, if you're going into the next round of the BioCup, be sure to study up on your opponents, because winner takes it all. And like the Hunger Games, you must kill your enemies to survive. And to kill your enemies, you must know your enemies. So learn their techniques, learn their powers, see what they excel at, and use their powers against them. Destroy them. Dispatch another Inquisitor to hunt them down. All that jazz. Yeah, fun times. Fun times at the BioCup. Have fun, enjoy yourself, but remember, there's also fun in competition. So have a good time. Anyway, see you in the next coverage of the BioCup, or see you in the next episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series, which will be out at some point on Saturday. See you then.